Okay. Can you guys hear me? Let me see if I can get the
Yeah,
chat
we
here.
can hear you
Yeah?
loud and
Okay.
clear.
Okay, good.
When you're ready, we can start.
Okay, so let's start then. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our eLotus webinar today. My name is Donna, and I will be your host and your moderator for today's class. So right now in the world, it's a little bit still scattered. We're still in technically 2020, I would say. We have coronavirus pandemic still going on, and Texas is where they're scooping up snow and using it as water as best as they can. So for those of you who are in Texas watching this, if you leave the webinar because you don't have any power or anything, just let me know. We're here for you. We're gonna go ahead and take care of you guys. And yeah, so many prayers to you guys. Hope everything turns out quickly. Hopefully everything warms up quickly for you guys here. And so today's webinar that we have today is Acupuncture for Wen Bing Diseases, Part 1 with Marc Mastrandrea. And today's webinar is being recorded and presented by Lotus. Here at eLotus, we have been hosting educational seminars and webinars for over 2 decades. And we are proud to be your trusted source for premium CU content with over 120 speakers, 600 courses, and over 300 hours of continuing education. Today, we're very lucky to have with us Marc Mastrandrea return, and he's here to return to teach us Wen Bing diseases. Last time he was here was in November in 2020, teaching Shanhan Lung. And he did it over 2 days, and it was such a huge success filled with many clinical pearls. So now he's back to teach Wen Bing diseases. You can check Marc's speaker page, his speaker bio page, if you like to check out that recording for the Shanghai Lun. So Marc is one of the best students of Jeffrey Yuen and has a deep understanding of the classics and is able to so elegantly apply the theories to practical approaches in the clinic. He's filled with so many great knowledge and extremely generous with it. You're going to learn a lot today, and your brain will hurt, but in a good way. So you're going to love it. I just know it. Okay, so a little housekeeping before we get started. Our webinar will run from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. We'll have a 1-hour lunch break from 1 to 2 p.m. So that's 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern time. And we'll have 2 breaks in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, and Marc will let you know when those break times are. So if you guys have any questions for Marc pertaining to the topic that he's presenting, feel free to ask. This is the time to do so. And you can send your questions to the Q&A of the Zoom room. So okay. Okay, Marc, I will. And then so the lecture notes for today's class, you may have noticed that they were not available for download, but they will be. We received them this morning, and Marc was so busy. He stayed up so late last night, making it perfect for you guys. And he's always tweaking it because he just wants to give you guys the best information. So if he misses anything or doesn't go over something, it's in your notes. Everything's in your notes, and it's very comprehensive. So the notes will be available for download. I'll let you guys know when they are ready. I'm going to go ahead and work on them as the class starts. And most likely, they'll definitely be ready before the first break. And the chat room. If you notice in the chat room, there's an option to send the chat to all attendees. I'm sorry, all panelists or all panelists and attendees. So make sure if you are talking to everyone in the whole group that you set your chat to all panelists and attendees, because by default, it's just to all panelists. So if you're just typing to just the panelists, some people might be missing out on the conversation. And we want everyone to be part of the conversation. The quiz will be available after the class tomorrow. So we need to do the attendance once the class officially ends, and then the quiz will be available the next day, and you guys have 4 months to do it. And the video replay as well will be available on Monday, and the quiz will be available the next day. If you guys have any questions, just let me know. You can always send me an email. I am much better at answering emails in the chat room, because the chat room, the words just go by super fast, and I miss everything, and sometimes I will miss it. So again, email me. My email address is info@elotus.org. All right, guys. So that's all the housekeeping that we have here. And again, if you have any questions, just let me know. Other than that, let's go ahead and welcome Mark. And Mark, if you can do a quick sound check before we get started.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I like your background, Donna.
Thanks. You like my look at my glowing balls.
That we all know that Donna was I thought they were like for raves or something. Okay, yeah.
No, they were decorations of a wedding, and I just love them so much, and
That's
so
pretty
they
cool.
gave me.
And the other one here, this looks like the what are they? The curtains that they have in a lot of the between the kitchen in Japan or in Asian,
Yes,
like Asian countries.
It's my Japanese guardian.
Yeah.
Yes, that's her.
She's smoking opium. Is that what she's doing? She's partying.
Yeah, she's putting knowledge in my head. You see that?
Oh, that's what it is. She's breathing knowledge in your head. I like that. Awesome. All right. So, all right then. And Donna will tell us what's happening today because Donna is the boss. So, guys, if you get a question on the exam later that asks who the boss is, it's Donna Chow. So, all right. I guess we're going to get started.
Let's go.
Let's go. Whoa, let me adjust this. I'm trying to. Camera's on the top of this thing. All right. So, welcome everybody. Let's start by sharing this presentation. Share. All right. So here we are today. We're going to do Wen Bing diseases. Let me start off by saying that this is an introduction to this. This isn't comprehensive by any means. I don't even consider the Shanghamlun class I did comprehensive at all. It's just an introduction. What I do suggest before getting right into this too much is that we make sure that we focus you guys go back and you watch the Shanghamlun. The reason why you want to watch the Shanghamlun webinar is because it goes over in depth a lot of the pathophysiological channel mechanisms, which still take place in Wen Bing. It's just they don't always run in the 6 levels. But for example, Yang Ming in the bowels, we see that in the Qi state in Wen Bing. And so you'll see a lot of that explanation in depth in Shanghamlun, and a lot of those points will transfer over into treating heart disease. Some will be completely different, but some will be very similar. So if you're coming and taking this for the first time, you've never taken you did not take the Shanghamlun seminar, it doesn't mean you won't understand this. It just means that if you go back and you take the Shanghamlun seminar, you'll see how they both integrate. And again, this is just an introduction into this stuff. So, all right, let's see. All righty. All right, people are coming in. All right, so here we go. So if any of you were here for the intro the other day, we went over a little bit of history, right? So history here. Let's move this up. There we go. I'm trying to get my camera out of the way here so I can see what you guys are saying. Let me go back. So we know that China has, over the different dynasties, right? Some dynasties are more peaceful, some are more have more violence, more famine, different things are happening, right? So this evolution and change, right? The only constant is change, pretty much. So China went through this in their evolution of like the idea of Taoism and the idea of moving through change, and Confucianism, Neo-Confucianism, all these different things that evolved also affected their thought of, how medicine works, right? And how the body works. And so a lot of these social climate and changes affected medicine, very similar to, in fact, what we see today in the Western world, in the United States. For you people joining us from the United States or even in Europe, you'll see that social climate affects medicine, affects medical theory, right? So this is something that will influence it. So over time, as society grew, right, and the population expands, pathology and the way it spreads changes, right? And this will start to bring about new ideas as population grows, as people start to live closer together, as you start to get more densely inhabited areas. You notice that pathogens spread quickly, much more quickly between people. It's not just, I was caught out in the rain and the cold and I caught something. It's, my son coughed on my wife and now they're both sick, and then my wife got my daughter sick and now I'm sick, and you start to see this really pass around. So you start to see these changes, this idea that maybe, for example, we'll see here in Wen Bing, maybe there's something else other than the 6 climatic factors affecting health of people. Maybe some of it is also something that we'll term Li Qi, this idea of pestilence, right? So let's see here. All right, let's go to the next one. All right, so we have these things. So during the Qing Dynasty, or the Yuan Dynasty, during the Qin, you had this kind of change in society, right? The Qing Dynasty, this is Qin Dai is what this character is. And you have this kind of pushing in of the Mongolians from the north, right? And so you start to have questioning within Chinese society of, well, is this the way we want to run society? Are the invaders of foreigners, right? This is their idea of the foreigners. We see this a lot even today in modern societies. Those who are outside, are they coming in because we've lost something in our society? Do we need to have a stronger, border? Do we need to have a stronger military, or have we lost context in ourselves? So all of these things are being discussed and talked about. And so because of that, you start to see changes in this medicine. So during the Yuan Dynasty, this is when the Mongolians invaded, right? And they took over China, forcing a lot of the Chinese, the last surviving Chinese dynasty to the south, right? And this is where today we have Beijing. Beijing was built as a capital, was built by the Mongolians. It's very interesting. So for you guys historically who are interested in that, Beijing was built up during the Yuan Dynasty by the Mongolians and has been a prominent city in China ever since. It used to be called Yanqing. That was the ancient name of Beijing. And if you go to Beijing today, you'll find that they have a beer called Yanjing Pijiu, Yanjing beer. It's actually pretty good. And you can get it in all the hutongs, and it's just kind of a throwback to the ancient name of Beijing. So we have this guy, right? Liu Wansu, right? And Liu Wansu comes along, let's see here. Somebody says it's terrible. Oh, the beer is terrible. Yeah, if any of you guys have had it, yeah, it's kind of a light beer, but it's very Beijing. All right. So Liu Wansu. So Liu Wansu was the first of the four great masters, right? And he was during the Qin Yuan period, from 1110 to 1200 CE, right? So he found this idea of the school of cold and cooling, right? They call this Han Liang Pai, right? And this observation, he observed that as people were living closer together, as things were happening more and more and faster, you notice more developments in inflammation. And so what would happen is you would find that the fevers would increase more quickly. They wouldn't sit in these cold periods as much. They would tend to get hot more, and then they would tend to get higher and higher fevers and then die very quickly, right? And at his time, more epidemics spread. So this was something that Liu Wansu saw. And so he started to think that maybe people's Wei Qi is very young in nature, right? Maybe we're too young. Maybe we're always out. We're always doing stuff. So maybe the idea is that we need to cool the body, right? We need to cool things down, right? So any sort of exteriorly invading pathogen or interiorly engendered pathogen will always turn into heat. So we need to help cool the body, calm the body, produce more of a yin state, right? So this idea that he goes through is the idea that he wants to do this so that we reduce the external invasion of pathogens from entering the body. By cooling down the body and helping to calm, we actually reduce the ability for external invasions to come in. This is his idea. So over time, though, if you don't do this, if you don't cool the body, you don't balance Yi, and that yang will end up burning and degenerating the body, creating chronic degeneration, right? Chronic inflammation. And we see this today in chronic degenerative diseases, right? People talk about this. So this was a theory that Liu Wansu really pushed. And this is kind of the beginning. He's one of the four great masters of the Qin Yuan period. This is the beginning of what we see, this idea of heat as a pathogen, right? It really starting to be pushed. Let's see. I'm trying to see. Oh, there we go. I got notes. So notes will be coming. Again, nobody gets my notes early because I constantly am working on them. So I finally send them down at 2:30 in the morning. So she's got to work them out. You'll get the ones for today, probably at the end of the day. And then the ones for tomorrow, you'll probably get tomorrow. There's a lot of notes here. Not as many as Shanghanlun, but there's a lot of notes. Liu Wansu. So he also believed that strategies for treating disease needed to be based on individual patients' conditions, right? So we also had to update these things from the Han Dynasty. to fit more modern diseases. And you're going to see this start to take place historically in a lot of doctors during this time. A lot of them will start to think that, older ways of treatment are not fit for modern times. Now, when I say modern times, this is relative, right? This is the Jin period. So this is about 1,000 years after the Huangdi Neijing, right, was written. So this is this idea that that's the modern time then, and that the Huangdi Neijing explanations in the Shanghanlun are not working for those modern diseases, so we had to adjust those. So he talked a lot about clearing heat, draining fire. He also stressed a lot of acupuncture. He laid importance to the 5 antique points. So all 5, and he particularly talked about the Jingwell, right, and the Yuan source points, the Jingxue, right, at the ends of the fingers to clear heat, and the source points, right, for nourishing. So these are very interesting. You can pull heat out of the source, or out of the deep layers using the Yuan source points. So this is very interesting that he actually talked about this, about using these points. So he had a very big influence on future development of Wen Bing with his theories, and we will see how a number of these things filter down into the use of acupuncture for Wen Bing. All right, Zhang Zihe, right? So Zhang Zihe was the founder of the Gongsha Pai, right? So the Gongsha Pai is a school of attacking and purging, right? So he was a military physician. So he was serving in the military, and when he returned to his hometown, that's when he really developed his ideas. And a lot of them were very much influenced by his perception of military movement, having a strong military, right? A strong Wei Qi, a strong presence, defense, right? Because Wei means this defensive idea. For those of you who don't speak Chinese, Wei Shenjian means like the protecting life bathroom, right? And this idea is like they're referring to it as that which protects life, but that also protects that which protects cleanliness, right? And this is the idea of a bathroom. So you should be cleaning your hands. So this idea of protection is in the Chinese thought Wei, right? So this idea of Wei Qi, Wei is this protection, this defense. So he really promotes a lot of this idea of protecting the person by clearing things out, right? He was very influenced by Lu Wansu in the belief that treatment must be updated from the Han Dynasty beliefs and tailored to fit each person. So he included a lot of Lu Wansu's theories in the development of his school, and he emphasized a lot about Wei Qi to push things out through sweating, through vomiting, through tearing, right? Through purging, urination, and defecation. So a lot of his stuff was about the movement of Wei Qi, right? Because what is this? Tearing, unconscious tearing is related to mood, that's related to Wei Qi, right? So your eyes tear not because of an emotion, but because of something that irritates them or something being pushed out. This is a movement of Wei Qi, right? Wei Qi comes out through Jingming, bladder 1, right here on the inside of the eye, and it's pushing out. So they're using Wei Qi to push things out of the body or the bowels, right? All this smooth muscle in the intestines is all the pathway of Wei Qi internally, right? Moving this. So he's stimulating Wei Qi to help purge the body. So he was very focused on this idea of Wei Qi, right? As if any of you guys were in the Shanghanlun class or have not taken it yet, that has a lot more Chinese. I pulled back on it because I had some people complaining that their characters overwhelmed them. So I pulled back. There's not as much Chinese characters in this one. But doesn't mean you shouldn't learn them. It's really important to learn enough so that when you see things, you can understand the context. So here we go. So the next person we have is Zhang Yuansu, right? So Zhang Yuansu is actually Li Dongyuan's teacher. So Li Dongyuan, for you guys who don't know, founded the Earth School, right? He wrote the Pi Wei Lun, the stomach and spleen, stomach treatise, right? So this idea is he was also Zhang Yuansu, the teacher of Li Dongyuan, was also a Qing Dynasty doctor, right? He made a lot of controversial statements as well. He was saying the same thing: the old medicines don't fit modern days, right? We need to update medicine, right? And so he was very controversial in that sense as well. He suggested that rather focusing on cold and treating cold, again, you should focus on treating heat, right? The reason why he probably is known today is because Li Dongyuan, who went on to become rather famous in his Earth School, really paid Zhang Yuansu a lot of money to go study with him. And so that could be an idea that maybe Zhang Yuansu didn't really want to take on Li Dongyuan as a disciple. He wanted, you pay me and I'll teach you something, right? This is kind of not really a discipleship. It's more of a student idea. Maybe he didn't really want to teach his stuff out there, so you have to lure him out with money, right? So this is this idea that maybe Zhang Yuansu wasn't so open with teaching his ideas outwards. The idea here that you see is that heat is the main pathogen. Eventually, through Li Dongyuan, became understood as the idea of yin fire, right? This idea of yin fire. And later, these ideas, for any of you familiar with yin fire, these ideas will give rise to the understanding of using the pericardium points to clear heat in the blood. And we'll see that with acupuncture today. So what is yin fire, right? We'll talk a little bit about this. So yin fire is this idea developed by Li Dongyuan. It came from his studies of Zhang Yuan's, right? It's this idea that heat can be engendered through, it can be created or smoldering and grow through diet, taxation, stresses, overwork, undersleeping, right? So that would create fatigue, right? Unexpressed emotions that you keep repressed, right? All these different things that are affecting heat internally, creating qi stagnation because you're not able to express them. Desire, right? Unfulfilled desires, right? The heart is a fire organ, right? It's a fire zhang, right? So this idea is it wants to go out. It's the emperor. It wants to conquer that which it desires. It has a desire. It wants to get that. And excess desires can cause too much fire in the heart, right? But also at the same time, you can get the idea of having a desire in your life that you never, that thing that you always regret never doing, and that can sit there and smolder, and that can create internally fire for things that you wish you did, but you never did, right? And you always kind of regret never doing them, right? This is this idea of desires that are never, never fulfilled or remain unfulfilled. So when heat, so when heat moves into the yin level, it does not get expressed externally. And does not get expressed externally. It develops into yin fire, right? So you have this idea of this yin fire. So this can grow, right? And as it grows and it moves up, it can move into, right? It starts here and it moves up into Da Bao, right? This point, spleen 21. And from here, this great lobe, the spleen, this channel moves across the chest like this, right? And as it moves into this, it comes into contact with the Bao Mai at Zhou Wei, right? So Zhou Wei is CV15, right? Right here. And so from there, it can move into the pericardium, right? So this is where you can get, for example, heat entering the pericardium later on. You can get this fire enter the pericardium from yin fire that's internally, that we will see exacerbated later on in Wen Bing, as we go along and see pathogenic progression. We'll see a lot of that tomorrow. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Okay, so heat can be created as a response to dampness, right? So for example, food issues. Maybe you're not eating correctly, right? And the spleen and stomach are weak, and the body creates this inflammation to try to burn off the dampness, but instead it turns smoldering and you get damp heat, right? So this can be another thing that can happen. Qin yang can also generate heat, right? The kidneys can generate heat to try to deal with dampness in the lower jiao, right? But what happens is that dampness is heavy, it settles down into the lower jiao and mixes with the heat, and then you get this Qi and Ju, right? We talked about this in Shanghan Lun, this idea of this conglomeration and accumulation, and it gets bound together, this kind of damp heat, and you get these nodules, these accumulations or concretions in the lower jiao, developing gynecological issues. So yin fire can result in that. So this, take all this and understand that Zhang Yuan Su teaching about this fire that was, untreated and left untreated, and Li Dongyuan then took this idea, and he's saying that you can resolve a lot of fire by sticking with treating the stomach and the spleen and maintaining them and maintaining your life, you as the center of your life, not just the stomach and the spleen as the center of your body and the Zhang Fu, but you as the center of your life, maintaining harmony within yourself to keep from these things happening, right? And this is one of the big things. So this is why, for example, stomach and the spleen, like spleen, stomach, earth school type treatments can treat psychological disorders, because they can be rooted in or have affected digestion. They can be rooted in the ability to digest thoughts, the ability to, kind of like constantly thinking pensive about the same thing. So all of these things are connected, and this can over time create qi stagnation, which can create fire that can move through the body. So let's talk a little bit more about Li Dongyuan. So Li Dongyuan, he's also known as Li Gao, right? So Li Gao was considered the founder of the Butu Pai. So Butu Pai means we call it the earth school, but it actually means Bu means to tonify, right? Tu means earth. So tonifying earth school, or the school of tonifying earth, right? So when he was alive, there was a lot of war and famine. And as a result, people ate whatever they could to fill their stomachs. They were so hungry. So like one story I've heard is that people ate sawdust, right? And that's something that he saw. People were eating sawdust in it just to fill their stomachs. So he was seeing a lot of malnourishment and problems due to very poor nutrition, very poor food, and then those things that came about that injured the ability of the spleen and stomach internally to do that. So he believed that humans have sufficient weight, yuan qi, right? So it's not a problem with the kidneys. This is his belief, that we all have enough for what we need. It's not the prenatal qi, it's the postnatal qi. The postnatal qi is where the crux of the issue lies. So the ability to produce postnatal qi through the stomach and the spleen, that's what gives somebody enough vitality, right? So this is what he focused on. Tonifying, right? Butu means tonifying the earth, right? So tonifying the earth organs, so stomach and spleen. So he taught that the damage from stomach and spleen comes from three things: overindulgence in eating and drinking, particularly in those things that you consume that damage or injure the stomach and spleen, cold things, excess sugars. Today we would say excess sugars. Back then it was like foods that had no nutritional value. They weren't even foods in many cases if you're in a famine. So the mixing of certain things. So all of these things, or eating too much, right? So this idea of feast or famine, if anybody here in today's class has ever grown up poor, you know what that's like. I grew up very poor, so I know what it's like to not have food for weeks on end and then have food and you just eat because you don't know the next time you're going to eat. And that's something that a lot of people who don't grow up very, very poor realize is like, there's this weird thing of this feast or famine. When you have food, you eat as much as possible. But ironically enough, it's a survival mechanism, but it injures the stomach and the spleen in the process. So that's something he was also working with, because that overindulgence, even if it's for a short amount of time, can damage the stomach, right? It can cause injury to the stomach. Overwork, creating exhaustion, especially if you're not getting enough food, right? That's a big thing. Continuous emotional expression. So excessive emotions can affect the body negatively and weaken digestion, ultimately leading to yin fire. Again, he was living at a time where you had war, you had famine, people were dying, right? You had people, wars going on. So you had a lot of very strong emotions happening. And you could see that all of this was also leading to not only personal issues within people, right? But also in society as a whole, right? This whole idea of not being able to find center, of expressing emotions as a society strongly in one direction or strongly in another direction, right? Which can be very destructive, which then can create smoldering issues underneath society that are never taken care of, that produce heat within society. So it doesn't necessarily have to just be a personal idea. It can also be a social idea, right? All right, so physically weakened digestion can lead to body exhaustion, while mentally the decline of the spleen and stomach affects the person's cognition and the ability to consciously act. They should say consciously act or work intellectually, right? Conscious action, or work intellectually. So when you're hungry and you're very hungry for a long time, a lot of times you can't put things together as easily as you could when you've eaten nourishment, you've had good nutrition. This is something that in the minutes that person gets good food, suddenly, boom, this can happen, right? So like a personal example, because I put myself through school, right? When I was first in medical school, Chinese medical school, I was very, very poor. I was living in New York City, and the first 2 weeks of school, I was starving. Like the first month I was starving. I didn't have any money. And so I just moved, and I was settling in my own spot, and I didn't have a lot of money, and I was just trying to go to school and wait for loans to come in. I couldn't eat anything. And I remember we had very simple tests. Like for the first month we were in school, just quizzes, right? Every week in some classes. And I was like bombing them. And it was weird. Like my mind couldn't put things together, right? And I remember a teacher pulling me aside, very sweet woman, and she took my pulse and she goes, you should be passing these, tests. These quizzes are really easy, but obviously you're super spleen qi deficient. And I was like, okay, what's that? It was like my first month in, and she explained, she said, go get some lentils, right? get some salt, get a little cinnamon. You know, she explained how to do this. So she's like, you can use oil. She was a vegetarian, but she said you could use butter if you want it. You know, soak the lentils, do this. Boom, I did what she said. Nourish the spleen and stomach. I came back. Every quiz was 100. It was just because I wasn't being nourished enough. I couldn't think. So this is something that really affects people, right? So this will help to further along the idea of self-cultivation, to strengthen a person, right? To deal with exogenous factors by treating the inside, strengthening the inside to strengthen it. Right? So Li Dongyuan, right, Li Gao, he goes on to write the Piwei Lun, the stomach and the spleen treatise. In it, he says Nei Shang Piwei, and then he says, Bai Bing You Sheng, which means that the injury to the stomach and the spleen is causes the 100 diseases. So this idea that injury, Nei Shang, internal injury is what he's talking about. Nei Shang, this idea of internal injury to the Piwei, the stomach and the spleen. Bai Bing means 100 diseases. You Sheng, or give birth to 100 diseases. So Sheng means to be born or give birth to. Yo is like of, so or from. So the 100 diseases are born from that. So this is this idea that you want to strengthen the stomach, or you want to strengthen the spleen. So then we have Judan Shi, right? So Judan Shi is a school of nourishing yin. Sometimes they call this the Danshi Pai, right? So this is named after him. So he's the grandson of a very prominent Confucian scholar. So he influenced a lot by classical theory and Confucian thought. He was also very influenced by Li Dongyuan, right? Particularly the idea of harmony of the stomach and spleen, harmony of the center, right? And its abilities to digest and create and replenish fluids, postnatal fluids, right? So Zhu believed lives of overindulgence and excess activities are ones that lead to chronic illness, right? So this was his real belief. So you can kind of see this from Li Dongyuan moving over into Judan Shi, where Li Dongyuan was like, we want to strengthen the stomach and the spleen. We don't want to overindulge because it injures it. Now Zhu is saying overindulgence in itself leads to excess ministerial fire, leads to excess desires, right? Your desires, I've got these desires, are not filled. I'm creating more desires. I'm overindulging, which creates more desires. It's creating more this excess ministerial fire, which can lead to qi, blood, and phlegm, and other constrained emotions, right? That feel like they need to be fulfilled. I have to have this new car. I have to have this bigger house. I got to outdo, these people and look better at this country club, whatever it is, country club, yacht club, whatever. I need to have a bigger boat. These unfulfilled desires, right? So Zhu had this idea. So he was quoted as saying, Yang Cheng You Yu, Yin Chang Bu Zhu, which means the idea that yang is often in surplus. Yang Chang means often. Yo means to have, and yu means surplus. So yang often has surplus. Yin often is insufficient. So this idea yin is obviously yin yang, yin, and then chang means often. Bu zhu means to be not enough or not sufficient enough. So insufficient in this case. So Zhu believed that we are too yang, too active, and too emotional, right? So as a result, yin declines. And as yin declines, jing declines, right? So this was his belief. Let's see, we got a message here, and we got a question. All right, this is not for me. Hold on, let me just go through. Go a little slower. Sure, we can definitely go slower. All right, so we're going to slow down even more. No problem. We don't have to rush through things. We don't have to cover nearly as many slides as we did last time. All right, so Judan Shi. So again, as a result of yin deficiency, we also accumulate dampness. Why? Because the body is not able to create sufficient physiological yin, and in the process of trying to do that, because the body has been damaged by this heat, this fire, the spleen has been damaged by heat, the stomach has been damaged by heat. Instead, we create these undigestible fluids, this dampness, right? And then this dampness over time is used by the body to try to cool heat, and you end up getting it to mix with heat, right? And this can be created over and over through lifestyles of excess yang and not enough yin nourishing, right? And you get damp heat, right? And this is where the root of disease lies, right? So this damp heat is where the root of a lot of this disease lies. So clearing damp heat and nourishing yin are at the very, heart of all of Judan's treatments, right? So here we go. Temperance is what he was talking about. So the idea of pulling back, not having as many desires, not having as many indulgences, keeping a very clean diet, hygiene practices, things that allow you to temper your body, that allow you to stay clean, taking all that time you would spend outside and using it on self-cultivation, right? And adjusting for seasonal changes so that you're in harmony with the seasons, right? He would say clearing heat is not enough, right? You can clear all the heat you want, but you also need to nourish yin, which is, now we've gone from Luan Su, who talked about clearing heat, and we've come down through the, a little while now, 100 years, a little more than 100 years. And we're seeing now that Judan Shi is talking, maybe it's about 200 years. He's now saying, okay, you got to clear heat, but you also have to nourish yin. So you see this evolution in thought that's going on. And we're going to see this take place a lot, influence a lot in Wen Bing. So, as with Shanghanlun, Wen Bing is often strictly thought of as an herbal tradition. While treatment methods were developed to be through herbal theory and treatment, again, the pathomechanisms developed through the creation and revisions of theory have been applied to acupuncture. We know that these things aren't just moving Zhang Fu to Zhang Fu, right? They're moving through the channels. We know that. So if they're moving through the channels, we can treat it with acupuncture, right? So we know we can treat it with acupuncture. We just had to develop highly effective treatment, which happened over time. So it's not commonly taught, but it is developed. And hopefully today, with what we shared, just like with what we did with the Shanghanlun class, you'll be able to take this as a basis. And then again, I'm just giving you ideas, and you can even go on beyond that using those theories and create more and add to it yourself. Wen Bing is not a completely formed theory. It's still evolving in many ways. It's one of the newest schools. And so, the addition of acupuncture and the alterations of it, of the theory over time, and the addition of acupuncture and how it works and functions on these alterations, such as with COVID that we saw, and these different things worked phenomenally well. So these things are still evolving. All right, Shanghanlun is attributed to one person pretty much, right? Zhang Zhongjing. But so we say that Zhang Zhongjing developed Shanghanlun. Now there's been revisions that have occurred, right? These different people have revised it, have adjusted it, But in Wen Bing, really it's multiple people that have added to this over the time from the late Ming Dynasty to the Qing Dynasty. Multiple authors have, and thinkers have added to this theory to bring it to what it is now. So there's not a single book like you find with the Shanghanlun. There are many books, right? And we'll talk about this a little bit. All right, lecture notes are available for download now for anybody who wants to get them. All right. Let's see, next page. All right, so we have these four patriarchs, right? And we talked a little bit about this in the intro. So the four patriarchs are credited with the creation of Wen Bing, right? So you have Wu Youke, right? Wu Youke in the Ming Dynasty. You have Ye Tianshi. He was in the Qing Dynasty, right? And these are in chronological order, by the way. So if you look at this, you know that this is the order that they came in, right? Then you have Shi Xi, right? He was in the Qing Dynasty, and Wu Zhutong was much later than the rest of them. He was the most recently alive. He died in the 1800s. So Wu Youke, he was living during the Ming Dynasty. He wrote the Wen Yi Lun. The Wen Yi Lun is this treatise, right? A Lun is a discussion, like Shanghanlun, right? Lun is a discussion or a treatise on something. So Wen Yi, it's a discussion, it's a treatise on Wen Yi. So this book is the first to specialize in warm diseases only, right? It's the first major book to specialize in warm diseases. It looked at and discussed the difference between cold diseases, as in the Shanghanlun, and this idea of warm diseases. And it was saying that they are not the same thing, even though in the Shanghanlun, they talked about warm diseases being an aspect of a cold disease that had evolved into a warm disease due to qi stagnation and whatnot, and the interaction of the defensive qi, the wei qi, with the pathogen. In this case, they're saying that this pathogen that comes in can be warm, it can be hot, it doesn't have to be cold. Or this idea, it doesn't have to just be wind to ultimately create heat. It can be heat, which is already hot. So this is this idea. So he discussed also the differences between Wen Bing and Wen Yi. So Wen Bing is this idea of a hot disease. Wen Yi is a hot epidemic, a pestilence, this very strong disease that rips through somebody very quickly with a high fever and can kill them very quickly and then can spread throughout the population. Wen Bing can just be a disease that is a high fever and has many symptoms of a hot disease, but isn't necessarily hyper contagious and doesn't necessarily kill somebody very fast. So this is the separation between those. So he introduced the idea of Li Qi, right? So Li Qi, or this pestilent Qi. Again, this is not the idea of the Liu Qi. The Liu Qi is this idea of 6 natural Qi in the environment, right? And this is idea of hot and cold, damp and dry, and all these things that can affect the body. But in this case of Li Qi, it's the idea that a person can pass on this Li Qi through touch, mouth, nose, right? It can affect people who are young and old. And so this is really the first idea of something that's kind of like the germ theory that developed in the West. But that didn't develop for another 200 years in the West. Chinese medicine has been ahead of the ball, you know, for a long time. And this trend of being ahead is then again proved again here in the fact that 200 years before any germ theory, 200 years before Pasteur came along, Wu Youke was already discussing this idea. Ye Tianshi. So Ye Tianshi, 1667 to 1747. His students compiled his teachings into a book called the Wen Zhi Lun. So Wen Zhi means that which is warm and hot, right? So Wen is like warm, Zhi is hot, Lun is a discussion or a treatise, right? So a treatise on warm heat. He explained the ideas of the warm disease development, right? So he was the one who developed the idea of this hot disease coming in from the exterior, entering the Wei level, moving in and penetrating the Qi level, the heat getting very big in the Qi level, right? Because you have in the Wei level, you have the Wei Qi fighting, right? Or we call in the idea here in this, in the Wen Bing is the Zheng Qi, the upright Qi, right? So it's fighting in the Wei level, right? Which is a version of Wei Qi, or Wei Qi is a version of Zheng Qi, right? If it pushes through that, it gets into the Qi level. You get a lot of heat, very similar to Yang Ming in the channels, Yang Ming in the bowels, very high heat, right? And if it's able to burn off the fluids, burn off the yin, it moves into the Ying level, where it starts to, you start to have both hot, full hot signs and yin deficient signs. And then if it gets past that and is able to whip up the blood, stir up the blood, or get into the blood in any way, say in the pericardium or the liver, you can have bleeding out of the orifices. You can have people going into comas, having heart attacks due to high fevers, you know, delirium, all these things. So he discussed this in the, as this whole theory, right? This 4-pattern theory. Today in Chinese, they call it the Wei Qi Ying Shui Bian Zheng. Bian Zheng means the differentiating patterns, the differentiate like disease patterns. So that's Bian Zheng. So he had the idea of Wei, Qi, Ying, and Shui, blood, right? So this is this idea. He also discussed the idea of treatments that were discernible, right? So he didn't just say, hey, this is the pattern and this is how it moves. He also started talking about treatments for each level, right? So he was the first one to really develop these treatments for these 4 patterns. He made this effort to focus on medicines that were easily accessible and not very expensive, because when you have an epidemic and the medicine is really far away, or it requires things that are rare and that cost a lot of money from high mountains, and they have to be processed, or, you know, you only know one person who can get it, the supply chain is weak, you know, there's not really much, that's not going to be great for where you need it, right? So, and by this time we're talking, you know, almost, you know, 1500 years pretty much after the Shanghanlun, a lot of the Shanghanlun formulas had become very large. You know, they weren't very simple. A lot of the things that you needed were far away, right? Some of the herbs, you had to be able to get them. You had to be able to have them on hand, and you're going to need a lot of them if people are getting sick all over the place. So he started looking for inexpensive herbs, things that can grow in your front yard, you know, things that you can collect, that everyone can grow, they can have gardens of, you know. Honeysuckle is a perfect example of a Wen Bing formula, a Wen Bing herb that is very common, that everybody can grow, and it works phenomenally well to clear heat, right? So things like this that were added, that what Ye Tianshi focused on. Shi Shengbai, right? So Shi Shengbai wrote the book. He wrote the Shi Pian, or Bing Pian, which is the Shi means dampness, Zhi means heat, right? So damp heat. Bing Pian is like chapters, right? So these damp heat chapters, and these chapters on damp heat diseases. So he helped forward the idea of warm diseases and warm disease system by expounding on pathogenic mechanisms, pattern identification, and treatment of damp heat. Whereas Ye Tianshi was talking about hot diseases, Shi Xi is talking about how dampness can complicate a Wen Bing, right? And then when dampness complicates is Wen Bing. So when it complicates is Wen Bing, you have stomach turbidity, you have spleen dampness. Heat can move in and injure the spleen, making the spleen not be able to transform fluids. Therefore, yin declines, fluids decline, and you end up with dampness, right? You can end up with phlegm. So damp heat will move, right? It'll move from the stomach to the large intestine, right? So it's through Yang Ming, right? Yang Ming of the bowels. It can move to the small intestine. The body's trying to clear it out. And the bladder, right? It can move into the gallbladder, damp heat in the gallbladder channel. And then eventually it can move into the sanjiao and settle down in the lower jiao, affecting the kidneys, right? And so creating these conglomerations and these adhesions, and, you know, gynecological issues, full masses, you know, blood masses in the abdomen, all these things. So because you have this dampness and this heat, and it's just binding together over time, and it's brewing, right? Like you brew down like a chili or like a stew on the stove, it gets thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker. So he talked a lot about relation of damp and heat. So then the last one here we have is Wu Ju Tong, right? So he wrote the book, Wen Bing Qiao Bian, right? So Wen Bing Qiao Bian Qiao Bian means a detailed analysis. And again, Wen Bing means, hot diseases. So there's detailed analysis of hot diseases, right? Or warm diseases. So he based his writing on Ye Tianshi's ideas of the 4 levels: Wei, Qi, Ying, and blood, right? So Wei, Qi, Ying, and Shui, right? So this idea here that he took this 4 levels and he said, hey, we can see this happening, right? We could see these 4 levels happening, but we can also see that it seems to move through the san jiao, from the upper jiao to the middle jiao to the lower jiao. And so he kind of overlaid them and saw where they matched and saw where pieces match. And we're going to see that tomorrow a bit. We're going to really focus mostly on the 4 levels, but then at the end of the class, I'll go over a bit about the san jiao identification and patterns, just a little bit. Maybe we'll do another class in the future that talks about that more. But this is his idea that he lays them over, right? And so he helped to synthesize this idea of warm disease treatments, both from synthesizing the 4 levels with the sanjiao mechanism patterns of pattern identification, and was able to overlay them. And he helped to create formulas into this real complete set, how to treat pathology, Wen Bing pathology, in the different levels of the sanjiao, versus treating it in the Wei, Qi, Ying, and blood levels, right? So this really helped to solidify and bring together Wen Bing as a complete system of both pattern identification and treatment. And originally this happened in herbal medicine, but this, it doesn't matter because it's still happening through the channels, right? So you should still be able to treat it effectively with acupuncture. And so acupuncture treatment is very, very effective for these things. So a couple words we wanted you guys to know. One of them is Shi Xi, right? Xie means something that's evil, right? Or perverse. So this perverse influence, that could be so Qi is obviously energy. Perverse influence could be something that could be a disease. It could be a bad influence on the person that makes them want to do something. Like, for example, they could say drugs are Xie Qi, like a illicit drug that makes you do bad things, right? Cocaine or maybe alcohol during the idea of the opium epidemic, right? Opium could have been seen as a Xie Qi. Anything that influences you poorly. The same idea for those of you who study feng shui, right? This idea is that you can have things that are give Xie Qi, things that give negative energy in your direction, this perverse influence. This is all this idea of Xie Qi. So it's under this larger nomenclature. So just keep that in mind as we go along. We also have the idea of li qi, right? That which is highly contagious and perverse, right? So something that is the perverse qi. It's a highly contagious xie qi, right? It's considered to transmit through the air, the mouth and nose, or by direct physical contact, including eating or ingestion, right? So this is something that can happen. If any of you have, you can see sometimes they'll talk about Ebola can be contracted through blood sometimes. That can come from certain types of meat that are uncooked, right, or undercooked, and then they ingest this. It gets into them through the blood of the meat that hasn't been cooked, and then they can catch that. So this idea of a very pestilent factor, right? Fu Qi, right? This latent pathogen. So this is any type of Shi Xi, any type of evil pathogen that remains latent in the body. And over time, it sits kind of incubated in this prodromal stage, right? We use the term prodromal, that which is incubating and growing. And after time has passed, it comes out stronger, boom, it hits the body, and now you've got this full-blown disease, right? So this is very common in Wen Bing. And so you'll see, we're not going to go over a ton of these, but the idea, if you catch something in the summer and it develops in the winter, you catch something in the fall, it develops in the spring, maybe that'll be a future class. But this is this idea of this latent pathogenic qi, this idea of this latent heat that's buried in the body. Okay, cool. So Wu Youke wrote, he talked about these 4 spectrums of heat, right? And this is important. So we have Wen, which is warmth, right? Warmth is not going to be as hot as Zhe. So when you see Wen, Zhe, they're talking about something that's warm and develops into real heat. So warm, something's warm, they have a fever, it's getting hot, but then Zhe is like a lot of heat, right? So this heat disease. And then Huo is like concentrated heat, it's fire, right? And then when those things are able to bind together, that heat, that fire binds together with damp, or binds and burns up yin, you tend to get concentrated heat toxin, right? We call du. So this is toxin. So this can include things like scar tissues, rashes, sores, tumors, swellings, canker sores, even anything that kind of seeps, pustules, right? Suppurations, any sort of extensive inflammation throughout the body. That's all a symptom of du, of Zhe du, right? Zhe du is like heat toxin, or Huo du is like fire toxin, right? So we have 3 stages, all right? This is important to know. So you have these 4 levels, right? We said we have Wei level, we have the Qi level, right? We have the Ying level, we have the blood level, right? And we also mentioned just briefly, we have the upper jiao, middle jiao, and lower jiao. Now, so as these things move through here, you also know that you have 3 stages of progression of severity of disease. So you have the initial stage. You can have an initial stage Wei issue, but then you can have something that's been lingering in the Wei level for a while. That's not so initial anymore. You can have an initial Qi level thing, something that moved from Wei to Qi, but then you can have something that sat in the Qi level for a while. That's not initial anymore. So this is another idea of stages of progression. So in the initial stage, the Zheng Qi, right? The Zheng is this upright Qi. It's that which is correct, that which is trying to fix the body. In acupuncture speak, we can also use the term Wei Qi, the defensive Qi. But it's not just that, right? It's also the fluids that support the Wei Qi on the surface that come from the stomach. How strong is the stomach? The stronger the stomach is and the spleen are to create these resources to strengthen the body, the better the person's prognosis. So this is this idea of Zheng Qi, right? So in the initial stage, you get an interaction between the Zheng Qi and the Shi Qi coming together and struggling. And that struggle creates friction, right? It creates heat. And so that's where we get the heat, the fever. Not only is the Shi Qi, this Wen Bing pathogen, hot, but it's also struggling with the Zheng Qi, which then creates more heat. Now, fever, we'll talk more about this, but this is a really important thing to keep in mind. Fever is a diagnostic. Particularly, it gives you a diagnostic for where your Zheng Qi and Shi Qi lie in respect to each other. So in the initial stage, if the Zheng Qi is greater than the Shi Qi, the fever can be mild and the pulse can be strong, which is a great sign because it's a sign of the Zheng Qi that is very strong and it can easily expel the pathogen. Some people, for example, to use the common thing that's going on today with COVID, some people have very mild fevers. Then if you were able to take their pulse, you feel a strong pulse. This Zheng Qi is pushing up. This Yang can push things to the surface to push things out. They can sweat it out. They don't get super, super hot. They get hot just enough. They're able to overcome and contain that Shi Qi and push it out of the body. Doesn't go any deeper. They're over it. Other people, it creates high fevers. And that's another issue, right? So in the initial stage, if the Zheng Qi is equal to the Shi Qi, the fever is really high and the pulse can be floating. Now, what this means, the pulse can be floating if the Zheng Qi is greater than the Shi Qi. the idea that yang is pushing things up. But in this case, if the zheng and the xia are equal, then what happens is the pulse is floating. It might not be as strong, or it might be more floating, but underneath there's not as much strength underneath the pulse. So you just have enough zheng qi to push this to the surface, to keep it on the surface. But you can realize as you push down in the pulse, as you push down through the levels, underneath there's not a lot of resources, right? So this idea, this high fevers due more to the battle, and due to them being equal, right? So they're battling and they're equal. So this is going to result in a lot of heat, and it's going to create a floating and a rapid pulse. This heat is going to cause the pulse to float more. So the higher the heat, the fever goes, the more you're going to feel the pulse float, because this heat is pushing up, and this yang of the body is trying to push the stuff up and out, right? So the higher the fever goes, the more floating you're going to feel. All right, so in the initial stage, if zheng qi is less than xie qi, the fever is high and the pulse is thin. So this is the idea that you don't have enough yin fluids, right? Zheng qi also has to have yin from the stomach and spleen. For those of you who took the Shanghanlun class, you know that a lot of the yin, or those of you who study Shanghanlun, a lot of the yin fluids come from the stomach, right? They're produced by the stomach. That has to help promote sweating, right? So if that's deficient, then you're going to find that the zheng qi is not as much as the xie qi, and the fever can be high, but the pulses will be thin. So this is this idea of fluids and blood deficiency, which we call the yin kui shu zheng. I missed the character for zheng here. Zheng just means a pattern, but this is this idea yin shui ku, yin kui shu, which means yin is deficient and injured, right? And it results in these thin pulses. Infection can spread really fast, and there's a lack of ability to contain it because the zheng qi is less than the xie qi. In this case, when the fever comes very quickly and gets very, very high, this is where you can have people stir. You can have convulsions when the fever gets really high. You can have seizures because the heat starts to stir wind, and this is what happens. So when zheng qi is equal or less than xie qi, this results in a wen yi, right? So when it's equal to xie qi and it's having trouble pushing it out, and you start to get really, really, really high fever that starts to, or it's less than, and you have very, very high fever, and it can move through the body very quickly, that's a wen yi, right? This isn't just for a person. This is also for a population of people, right? A population that has poor zheng qi, they're overtaxed, they're not sleeping well enough for nutrition. Their zheng qi as a population, as a group in mass, will be less than something, will be less than that xie qi. That Wen Bing, when it hits, will be able to turn into a wen yi quickly and circulate through the population, right? And we've seen this with COVID. So this really should also be a question about lifestyle, modern lifestyle. What is it that has allowed COVID to spread so fast, right? Or things like this to spread so fast, and get into a lot of these areas and populations that are very compromised, right? So it's really asking about, society as a whole and how healthy the zheng qi of the society is, right? So this is a sign of what? Population and environment health, living conditions. What are their living conditions? How close do you live to each other? Are you living on top of each other? Do you have enough space apart? That's a health. That's a health consideration. And then also the idea of diet, right? Diet and exercise. Are you eating good enough, well enough to be healthy? Are your zangfu healthy? Are your channels healthy? Are you producing enough yin? Are you getting enough exercise? Are you working? Are you getting enough? Are you working to stimulate your mind? Are you overworked, right? And what kind of stress are you going through, right? Are you overstressed? Especially if society feels like that society is stressed, society is in this battle and struggle, it can create more stress for the people in society and ultimately affect the zheng qi of the society. All right. So initial stages of a wen yi are a more severe fever, right? You'll get sweating. You'll have a more aversion to heat than cold. So you'll tend to have less chills, but more, but you could have more like severe aversion to heat. dark yellow urine, right? This is the signs of a Wen Bing turning into a Wen Yi, right? Dry eyes and mouth. This is yin depletion. The stomach fluids are weak, are deficient, so they can't rise to nourish the orifices, right? I talked on Thursday, I think, about how the stomach channel really, the main stomach channel only sits on the face, right? It comes down here, comes up to here. All the rest of this that we needle, that we think is so prominent, that's a branch, but physiologically or anatomically, the main stomach channel is just here on the face. And it's about bringing stomach fluids up to nourish the orifices, the mouth, the eyes, the nose, all these areas where the stomach channel runs by, right? So you'll see that this heat depletes and it can be injured. Maybe the stomach is previously injured. Maybe the heat injures it easily because the stomach is compromised, because of diet. So all of these things happen, or because of overindulgences, or because of not eating enough, or because of overwork while eating, like you're not sitting down to eat and taking time away to eat. Maybe you're working and eating, you don't stop. You're driving and eating. That's all you do, So all of these things can injure the stomach. Eating cold foods, right? Things like that. So floating in rapid pulses can be seen because you have this heat, right? It's really hot. It's pushing things up. And you get a tongue with a red tip. So why is it a red tip? Because the idea that heat is beginning to move in to the body. And if you wanted to, you're going to see this thing in Chinese. Sometimes they call it Changhuo, right? This idea of upper fire. Shang means up and Huo means fire. So it's upper fire that creates heat and inflammation. And a lot of people walk around with just upper fire. So when you all this heat up above. So when you catch a Wen Bing, when you catch one, you can actually, that Changhuo can be irritated, and the Wen Bing will very easily take and use that heat that's up here to spread and make itself much hotter, and it can spread and become a Wen Yi very quickly. All right, second stage, right? So 3 stages of progression. So second stage is the exuberant stage, right? This is when things get really strong. Some people say critical. Why is it critical? Because this is where you really can make a decision of, if you get correct treatment at the right time, you can clear this right out of you, or if you don't, you could possibly die from this, right? So due to the quick movement of a Wen Bing Wen Yi during this stage, the Zheng Qi must overcome the Shi Xi. If it's not able to, death can occur, right? This is when the fevers get really, really, really high. People convulse, they bleed out, or their brain fries, these type of things. All right. So you can have intermittent fevers in the exuberant state. So you have fevers which can come and go. You have fevers that can be tidal fevers, and they get stronger later, and then they subside. Also, you can have intermittent fevers because the body is trying to mount a response to the Zheng Qi to push everything out, and when it's unable to, it settles back into the chest again, all that, and it tries to regroup that Zheng Qi to push it back out again, right? So you get these alternating fevers. They come and they go, right? You can have a higher fever is a sign that the Li Qi is winning. So when the person gets a fever, it gets really, really, really high. That's a sign that the Shi Qi, the Li Qi, this pathogenic pestilent Qi is winning, right? If the Zheng Qi is strong when battling the Li Qi during the high fever, this incredible heat can result in what? Heat stirring blood, affecting the liver, creates liver spots, right? So this is a sign of heat affecting the liver. Right, liver fire in TCM, right? TCM diagnosis, treating liver fire, and you're going to see it motivate this heat, this blood to the surface, and you're going to result in liver spots on the skin. So treating liver spots, using them as a diagnostic, and then treating them later on will become a major Wen Bing focus that you can see in some cases. We don't really touch on it a lot in this class, but what I will say is that when I was in China, I've seen people treat this with fire needling. Particularly, they get needles that are specifically made for fire needling. They don't just use normal needles, but you could figure out what you do. They're normally thicker and they're fairly strong, and they can be reheated a lot, and they will use a fire needle to out thrust the heat. So they'll turn the needle red hot and then quickly, and you'll see this thing kind of shrivel up, and if there's blood there that's not dried, it'll come out, and you'll see it shrivel up, and then within days, the whole thing just flakes off. It clears the heat out of the area, and it goes away. So it's a very interesting treatment for fire needling for that, but we won't be teaching that in this class. All right. exuberant or critical stage. So here we go. So during this stage, the recovery or latency are very much dependent on the qi of the person and the yin of the body, right? Because you need to use yin to support this sweating, right? But at the same time, the heat is trying to, so it's this vector, but the heat is trying to burn off the yin, or it is burning off the yin. So yin is the vector to clear heat from the body, right? Sweating, urination, defecation, vomiting. But the heat is also drying all of this out, right? So if Zheng Qi is unable to push out the pathogen, the ability to put the pathogen in latency may happen. So this is where, for example, for you guys who watched, who have ever studied divergent channels, or you guys watched my little presentation on Corona, treating COVID patients with divergent channels, you'll see that divergent channels use some form of yin in the body to move things in latency away from the organs. So if the body does not have enough yin, but the yin is still strong enough, these resources are still strong enough, the wei qi is still strong enough, it will sometimes move the pathogen away from the organ and stuff it in a divergent channel trajectory, and to try to put it in a joint or something to hold on to it to keep it away from the organs. We won't be talking much about that, but this is just what I want you guys to know, that we're going to be focusing mostly on Wen Bing through primary channels. But if you find that you have lingering pathogenic issues, it could be that the body, it translocated this pathogen because it couldn't deal with the high fevers and everything else, and it was going to die. So it took all of its resources to, instead of trying to push it out, to stuff it down and basically in a box and try to hold it there, right? All right, we got a question. You say fire needling is used for liver spots. Yes, fire needling was used for liver spots. I oftentimes saw it used, it wasn't during the pathogen, it was after in the recovery, to help. So like, for example, if somebody were to be in a Ying stage or a recovering stage where they're yin deficient and they have this deficient heat, and they might have liver heat as a result when they're recovering. It could be in a severe stage, but normally they don't. Normally they do it in the recovery stage. They will fire needle. So they'll fire needle the liver spots. And that was very interesting, and it worked very, very well. So recovery or death, right? So you're either going to recover if the Zheng Qi is able to eventually get control of the pathogen and push it out, or the person could die. Or your body might, with this Zheng Qi, put this pathogen into latency. Right, might move it, and put in the joints. So if the body is able to survive the acute stages of the initial and the critical stage, but the Yang Qi is unable to, is too weak to push it out, it may move it into something that sits in the joints, or it could become chronic, right? Maybe it fails and the person dies, right? Our goal is to try to keep that from happening. So no stage in Wen Bing is too late to sweat or purge. Sweating is a more external thing, right? Purging is a more internal thing, right? So the idea, whereas in Shanghanlun, there are stages where you sweat or stages where you purge. So the more external stages, Taiyang and Xiaoyang, generally you sweat more, right? Because it's more in the exterior of the body. Taiyang is the most exterior channel. And Xiaoyang is the next most exterior channel that supports and pushes the Taiyang, right? Pushes from the internal out, or takes from the external and pivots in, right? It's that pivot between Yang Ming and Taiyang. So the deal here is that you only really sweat in these external stages, and in the other stage of, say, being in Yang Ming, you try to purge. And then if you're in the yin stages in Shanghanlun, you try to tonify the person until they're strong enough and they push the pathogen out to the surface to get it out. That's not the case in Wen Bing. And Wen Bing, clearing heat is of the most importance. Even if they're deficient, you're still clearing heat, and then tonifying yin. So you need to clear heat because this lychee can be very powerful. It can kill somebody, right? So this idea is that you're in a very short time sometimes. So the focus is to clear heat. That's the goal. So you can sweat, you can purge at any point according to symptom dependent, of course, in Wen Bing. So in Shanghanlun, let's see here. Okay. Just want to make sure I don't miss a text from Miss Donna Chow telling me it's a break time. In Shaolin Lun, there is a lot more emphasis made to pulse qualities. They talk a lot more about pulses compared to Wen Bing. And Wen Bing, you have pulses, but what you really have a lot of is tongue and teeth observation. So Wu Ju Tong developed what would become to be a Wen Bing comparable pulse-taking method, right? So what he did is he looked at the point at Ren Ying, right? This is what they call Ren Ying Mai, which is stomach 9 for some of you guys. And the other one is Qiko or Tai Yuan, right? Lung 9, right? And you take these two pulses and you can determine if the person ingested a pathogen, right? If they've ingested something, or if they it came in through inhalation, enter the lungs. So did it move into the stomach through ingestion, or did it enter the lungs? So how is this done? You compare the carotid and the radial pulse. If Qiko, lung 9, is greater than Ren Ying, stomach 9, then the pathogen is ingested, right? And then if Ren Ying is greater than lung 9, Qiko, right? So stomach 9 is greater than lung 9, then the pathogen is transmitted through the air. Now, many people go, why? Well, one's on the stomach and one's on the lung, right? Well, why would the lung pulse not say if it's greater that it was transmitted through the air? The reason why is because this here at stomach 9 is considered that which is in the upper jiao, right? This compares more to the upper jiao, and Qiko compares more to the middle jiao, right? And then you could take the pulse on the foot, and that would compare more to the lower jiao. So on the stomach pulse in the foot. So this is this idea of comparing upper and middle jiao. So stomach 9 is in the upper jiao. It presents with more things on the exterior, more things that are closer to the exterior of the body and that are in more of the upper jiao. And lung 9, the idea here is that you're comparing it. It will tell you more about things internal and in the middle jiao. So theoretically, it is believed that the weaker organ is unable to resist the pathogen, and this allows it to enter. But the question is here, what is a stronger organ? What makes it a stronger organ? So that's something that can kind of be a little vague, because different aspects of things, somebody might say, well, this has this and this and this, but this doesn't have that. But that's not like the lung. We measure lung strength a little different than we do spleen stomach strength. So that idea of what strength is can be up for question. All righty. Pulse taking in Wen Bing. So it is still an important tool, but it has to be taken in conjunction with all of the methods of diagnosis in order to create an accurate picture of the patient. So the idea here is that you cannot, in Wen Bing, you don't take pulses and you just say, oh, okay, he has a rapid floating pulse. It's definitely heat in the way later. You have to look at the tongue. You want to see what kind of fevers they're having, what kind of skin reactions they're having. I mean, even, teeth analysis, particularly the front teeth, to see how much fluid there is there, to see what the amount of stomach fluids that are coming to the mouth are. All of these things need to be taken together to create a complex pattern and understanding. Without that, you're going to be missing the ability to diagnose clearly. So pulses will commonly occur together in more complex things. So this way, taking them in conjunction will give you a deeper understanding and you'll understand the patient's condition better, right? So pulses, these are just a few. Again, you could study the Mai Jing, right? Wang Shuhe's Mai Jing. You could study Li Shijian's Mai Jing, right? You could study all these different things. John Chen has, pulse taking classes. These different people have pulse taking classes. And you can look to see what expresses hot, and heat. I'm just giving examples. This whole class is to spur thought amongst you guys. This is not something that's, definitive. If it's this, then it is, and if it's not my class, then it's not. That's not what I'm doing. It's to create thinking, to spur thinking, and from that, you guys can go and develop these ideas and add to them and figure out more, and figure out things I haven't done. There's a lot of stuff I haven't done. Pulses. So rapid pulses. So pulses that are rapid obviously are heat, right? They're speeding up the pulse. They're speeding up the rhythm of the heart. They're creating heat, right? They're moving, right? Heat creates movement, right? Floating. More heat pushes things. This yang pushes things to the surface. The body will push things to the surface if it has enough yang. It'll push this heat to the surface to try to clear it out of the skin. And that heat heat in general rises, so that will rise to the surface to try to sweat, right? Forceful, right? Heat can create force in something as it pushes harder, right? So whereas like cold constricts and tightens, you don't get as much force. Particularly you get forceful when things are surging, right? When they're flooding. So you can feel how strong the heat is. The more forceful a pulse is, the more the pathogen is hot. The stronger it is and the more it's pushing, right? So surging pulses, they call them overflowing, flooding. They're big. They almost feel like they're filling the vessel and then some. And then sometimes when you push on them underneath these surging pulses, there's not as much at the deep level. It's almost like their foundation isn't there. However, if it's forceful and flooding, forceful and overflowing, you can feel more at the deep level when you push down. Let's see here. Okay, just got another message here. I just want to make sure I've answered these. Okay. All right, so slippery. So a slippery pulse is an idea here that you can feel this like a pearl under the finger. We'll talk more about this. Soft, right? Deep. So soft pulses are an idea of yin deficiency, right? Deep pulses or sinking pulses, pulses that have sunken. So this is this idea that this pathogen has moved deep into the body, right? Doesn't mean that necessarily you've lost, though the pathogen is weak, it can mean that it's actually gone deep. Thin pulses are a sign of yin deficiency, right? Wiry can be a sign of qi stagnation, can be a sign of this entering the Xiaoyang vessel, right? A hasty pulse is a pulse that is rapid but misses beats, right? And this is the idea of it's getting more and more. It's very, very rapid, right? Like rushing, and it's missing beats in the process. So let's talk a little bit about this. All right, so rapid pulses. So a rapid pulse will go by breaths because that's the most accurate based on the person. Nice and flush. Maybe in a bit. Right now, let's stick with what we're doing so we don't get off topic. So this man asked if we could discuss a nice and flush. Maybe in a bit, but not right now. Let's stick with the pulse analysis. But we'll see. I'll try to get that in for you. All right. So rapid pulses, 6 beats per breath or more are associated with heat, right? So when you take your pulse and it's 6 beats a breath or more, this is an idea of a hot pulse. So in the old days, they would assume the goal was to have the physician be the measuring stick of health. Today, many physicians are not that. So sometimes doing it according to the patient and taking the patient's pulse and then seeing in respect to them, how many beats are they doing? Do they have 6 beats per breath? Or is it because in the old days, if they come in, they would have you sit for at least an hour before they treat you, so everything would calm down, and the doctor would be there, and everything would be calm, so you get them in a calm state. But now people come in quick, they go out quick. So maybe if you are working and you've been in your clinic for a while, maybe you do it by your own breath. That's how I do it based on the patient's breath, but some people do it based on their own breath. In the old days, it would have been many times based on the doctor's breathing. Signs, so rapid pulses are signs of yin and yang, of excess of yang, and can be yin fluid deficiency, right? This yin fluid deficiency can give rise to heat. And this is an imbalance of yin and yang, right? So you can have these combinations. So a rapid pulse being an excess of yang, or a yin deficiency creating yang, excess yang, can be mixed. It can be complexed with a bunch of other things. So things that can be complex with are like the rapid and superficial pulses. This indicates superficial heat, right? Wen Bing pathogens in the exterior, in the Wei layer, in the upper jiao, right? So these things that are on the exterior of the body, right? So a rapid pulse that is strong, a rapid pulse that is surging or flooding or overflowing, this is an example of excessive heat. So it's not just heat. You don't just have Wen Bing. You have like Wen Yi, or you have like a very strong Wen Bing pattern, right? So this could be a Wen Bing pattern that has gone from, it's very, very strong and overflowing. Now it's not superficial so much anymore in the sense of floating. It's more overflowing and rapid. This is the idea that this pathogen has moved into the qi aspect, right? So it's the heat is increasing as you get the struggle. Something that is rapid it's deep and sinking, right? So this idea, or they call deep pulses sinking pulses, or some people will call them sunken pulses. This is an indication that the heat, it's still rapid, has moved internally, right? So it's probably moved deep. It could have moved to the middle or lower jiao, right? If you look at it from the Sanjiao mechanism, it could have moved into the Ying and the blood levels. If you look at it from the 4-level theory, right? So a rapid pulse that is soft or a rapid pulse that is fine is a sign that heat has moved into the Ying and blood levels and is damaging the Yin Qi, right? The Yin Qi is in fact very damaged. By the time normally a pathogen gets to the Ying level, Yin Qi is fairly exhausted. You're going to see a lot of yin deficiency signs. So you would see, even though you see rapidity, you're going to see vacuous heat, right? Empty heat. But you can also see replete or full heat. The pathogen is full, but the yin deficiency is an empty thing. So you could see them together. So the idea of rapid pulses could be that which is the full heat sign, and then you get a fine or a thin feeling in the pulse. That could be the yin deficiency, right? So this could be also a sign that heat pathology has made its way to the lower jiao, right? So the yin of the kidneys and the liver. The kidneys are called sometimes the true yin, right? They're like the battery for all this yin. So them being the true yin, and then the liver, the liver is wood, right? Kidneys are water. So the kidneys, water, nourish wood, right? They nourish liver. So if liver yin becomes deficient, it calls on the kidneys. Then if kidney yin becomes deficient, there's nothing else to call on. So you're very, very inefficient. Now you have liver and kidney indeficient. So you have a very, very weakened condition. You can get tremors in this case. You can get tics. It doesn't have to be severe seizures. It could be constant tremors, the inability to control tics and movements in the body. All right, rapid and empty. So a rapid pulse that's rapid and empty is an indication of mild heat pathogens, but the body's qi and yin are weak. So you can feel rapid, you can feel the pulse, but when you press through it, it's really empty, right? There's really not much. This is the idea that probably they've got an invasion in the wei level, but their zheng qi is weak. Their qi, meaning, so their qi, their wei qi, and their yin qi, the fluids are weak. You're feeling this as it initially happens, but you're also feeling that their body might not be strong enough or up for the task to really deal with it. So you might want to start treating them immediately to help clear the heat and to strengthen this qi and yin fluids. Let's see here. All right, a floating pulse. A floating pulse is felt when the pulse vessel is depressed, right? So this is pressed down, and as you lift your fingers up slowly, this pulse should follow your fingers to the surface. It should follow it all the way up to the surface, up until the point where your fingers would leave the skin. So it's like pressing down on, if this was like a piece of wood, right? It's a teacup. But if this was in the water and it floats, I press down. And then what happens is as I lift my fingers up, it should follow my fingers back to the surface, all the way up to the top, my fingers, to the point where my fingers would leave. That's a floating pulse, right? It floats, right? This is a sign of lung qi diffusion, right? And things pushing up, yang trying to push things up. And this is very warm, right? This action is yang qi, is warm. This is a sign of qi moving to the exterior, heat moving to the exterior. In this case, it's an idea of lung qi diffusing out to the exterior to deal with the external pathogen. This pulse can be floating and rapid and is a sign of warm pathology invading the wei level. So this is this idea of it sitting up on the surface, right? So floating and rapid. Floating and hasty is a sign that heat is trapped internally, but it's trying to outthrust. It's trying to move to the exterior. So when it's hasty, you know that it's very, 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 very hot. Normally, that wouldn't be an exterior thing. That's an interior. That's heat trapped inside, and it's incubating, and it's getting hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter and burning to the yin, and it's trying to outthrust. When I think of outthrusting, I guess I think of like, have you ever seen a movie like a movie about space, right? Somebody's going to a planet, and the planet has like underneath is like molten gas, and it's like, and it's like shooting out gas and methane, and whatnot, and rocks. It's out thrusting its internal heat to the surface. The ship has to dodge around it and keep going. This is this idea of out thrusting. There's heat on the inside, and it's shooting out through methane vents, or it's shooting out through vents in the body to try to vent heat outwards, to vent heat upwards. You can see as the body has heat trapped internally and it's trying to outthrust, it will also try to upwards out thrust. And you can see in this case what heat comes up and it irritates the lungs. You can see more lung issues. You can see wheezing. You can see chest tightness or uncomfortability in the chest. You can see rapid breathing, right? So these things are the body trying to out thrust. It's making an effort to try to clear this out. It's trying to out thrust. So that's why it's floating. Yang Qi is trying to come to the surface to move this heat out. All right, let's see. All right, if a pulse is floating big and hollow, it is an indication of a strong, hot pathogen, and it's damaging the yin fluids because it's hollow. It feels big. That's the heat. Then you push through it. There's no substance. There's no yin. So it's hollow. So this is the idea of yin fluids being damaged. All right. Overflowing, surging, flooding pulses. So this is felt whenever the pulse is large and it rises strongly, right? It tends to feel like it's floating, right? But really the idea is if you push down through this, there's not really a strong base underneath it. That's just a basic overflowing pulse. You can have a strong overflowing pulse where you push down and it's got some oomph to it. That means the heat is a lot stronger, right? And it can be going deeper. But in this case, with just a basic overflowing pulse, this is a sign of full heat or fire accumulating, starting to accumulate internally. It can block the yang ming, right? So you can have full yang ming. You can have yang ming in the bowels. You can have yang ming in the channels, right? We talked about this. If anybody has studied Shanghen Lun, we talked about this in the Shanghen Lun class. So you can have this, and this heat blocks the yang ming, right? And so it can damage fluids. You can have somebody with constipation, right? They can have constipation, or they can have something they call, it's like constipation with, what do they call it? Circumfluence, which is this idea that you get dried stool stuck in the bowel due to yin deficiency, and then you get fluid out thrusting around this. Fluid coming out of the like diarrhea, like watery, foul-smelling diarrhea. So you get this alternating constipation diarrhea because it comes around the dried stool in the intestines. So this could be idea of heat blocking yang ming, right? So you can get also a flooding or an overflowing pulse that is hollow, right? A sign of strong yang ming heat. This is going to be yin deficiency. It's hollow. It's what? It's eating through the yin, right? So when you press down, you feel it, but in the middle of the pulse is hollow. There's not a lot of yin. Yang ming is becoming yin deficient. The intestines in the stomach are becoming yin deficient. And you could start to have heat binding. And we'll talk about that in a bit. But when you tend to see heat binding, you'll see thorns appear on the tongue. We'll talk about that. It's kind of the small projections of heat. A flooding pulses that is only felt in the Tsun area on the wrist. This is relating to heat in the upper jiao. So this is a sign of damaged lung, qi, and yin fluids. So that's this idea. All right, a slippery pulse. A slippery pulse feels like a smooth rolling quality under the fingers, right? So you can feel this in all three positions, or you can feel it in just one. It can feel like a ball kind of coming up and slipping, like rubbing like this, right? It can feel like you're trying to push down on a marble and it rolls out under your fingers. This is an idea of heat coming in and moving, moving things. So it's an abundance of yang in the pulse. When you take it in, that's moving in the body. So when you take it, you're taking it together with Wen Bing diseases, you will find that this is a symptom of heat pathology, but also a symbol of what? Zheng qi. Are they abundant in qi and blood? If somebody's abundant in qi and blood, then their pulses can be slightly slippery. And so this can also be when you take the pulse, if it feels like it's sufficient and slippery in a person who might have a Wen Bing disease and it's floating, so it's slippery and floating, that can be a sign of sufficient zheng qi dealing with the pathogenic factor, the Shi Xi on the surface, right? Slippery and wiry. So a slippery and wiry pulse is indicative of heat brewing fluids. So when it brews fluids, they get thicker and thicker and thicker. That's this wiriness. So this dampness is can be felt as slipperiness in the pulses, but as it brews, the heat brews the fluids and they get thicker and tight and sticky, right? You get more of a wiry quality as this heat binds. It gathers and it binds and creates phlegm, right? Slippery and soggy. You can have slippery, soggy, or soft and rapid, right? So slippery, soggy, soft, and rapid can be something that is a sign of blood and qi deficiency, right? And you can have this steaming, damp heat. So slippery, you have this heat, right? Soggy or soft, the yin is deficient, but the rapid is this heat, right? So you have this idea that the heat is consuming qi and yin, and it could be this idea that you have dampness forming, so you're getting this damp heat kind of brewing. So at this point, we're going to take a break. We're going to go over some more pulse analysis when we come back.